Welcome to the webinar, Building a Scope and Sequence of Work Skills and Experiences for Employment Success. I'm Melanie Phelan, a training specialist with the Illinois Center for Transition and Work.
Hi, I'm Jessica Sipovic, training specialist, also with the Illinois Center for Transition and Work.
And I'm Nicole Beery, also training specialist with the Illinois Center for Transition and Work.
The objectives today will be describing the fundamental principles that guide the preparation of students for post-school success. We will also be talking about the importance of having a longitudinal approach to work skills and experiences for ages 14 through 22. And we will also develop a logically sequenced skills and experiences that progress from foundational skills to more advanced competencies that are required for various employment settings.
So we're going to start out today by talking about the fundamental principles that are going to guide kind of our conversation around scope and sequence and those important work skills. We're going to merge two really important things, federal state laws, as well as research. We're going to pull those two things together to kind of come together to talk about work skills, scope and sequence. In most circumstances, we see scope and sequence kind of leaning on state standards or other things to build out those kind of important components that we're going to be guiding our instruction. But for transition to work, there isn't state standards. So we have to kind of pull on what the law tells us that we're required to do, as well as what the research says is actually working and is going to yield post-secondary success for our students with disabilities. So starting out with the fundamental principles, we're going to look at the federal and state laws. Federally, we have IDEA, which defines transition services to be a coordinated set of activities that facilitates the movement from school to post-school. There's going to be a wide range of experiences, activities, and opportunities that a student will participate in order to set them up for their post-secondary goals. Here in the state of Illinois, we start that process at the age 14 and a half. Federally, it's required no later than the age of 16, but here in Illinois, we start at 14 and a half, and we put together some meaningful activities, write post-secondary goals, lean on our age-appropriate assessments to build out exactly what needs to be happening year after year to support our students in moving towards their post-secondary goals specific to employment. We also have laws that support the employment coming from outside of the education space and looking at vocational rehab. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, oftentimes called WIOA, and we probably hear that throughout our webinar today. WIOA talks about kind of the collaboration that should be occurring between DRS and voc rehab staff and schools. They outline what's called the PREETs, the pre-transition services that should be provided to students with disabilities in the categories of job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences, also called WEBLS, counseling for post-secondary outcomes, workplace readiness skills, and instruction on self-advocacy. The whole goal of PREETs is to improve the transition from school to post-secondary education or employment. The target is to increase opportunities to practice and improve those workplace readiness skills through work-based learning experiences in competitive and integrated work environments. The other thing that it might also improve are those post-secondary outcomes as it relates to giving students opportunities to have different training opportunities, gain industry recognized credentials, and hopefully end in meaningful post-secondary employment. A lot of the work that's happening both in WIO and IDEA overlap, but there's also some distinct differences that we want to make sure we call out, because the responsibilities of the school staff, the responsibilities of state vocational rehab or DRS staff is going to look a little bit different, but they do come together to support an individual with a disability. Under the school requirements, we're talking about the individualized transition plan, as we discussed earlier. We're also talking about building out those measurable post-secondary goals on that annual basis. It requires that a student is invited to their IEP meeting where the discussion of transition services will be occurring. It also makes sure that we are delineating the services and supports that need to happen during the next year to move those students closer towards their post-secondary goals. The things that it does not talk about is how much money they're going to be making. It also doesn't talk about specific employment interventions. That's where our Voc Rehab friends hop in. So when we're looking over at WIOA, we're talking about the PREETs, the services that we just mentioned on the previous slide. It calls out that the VR agencies are the ones responsible for coordinating those services with students, families, and the schools, and really making sure that we have some thoughtful and intentional interagency cooperation between the two entities, as well as provides funding to ensure that we can provide those PREETs to students while they are still in school. The other thing it does address that IDEA doesn't is that those sub-minimum wage, making sure that students or individuals with disabilities are getting at least minimum wage, hopefully more. And also it talks about those specific employment interventions, including customized employment. And finally, the kind of last thing that we're going to look at as far as the laws is employment first. Illinois is an employment first state, which talks about real work for real pay. It says that competitive and integrated employment should be considered the first option when serving persons with disabilities of working age. It talks about the importance that regardless of disability, that every individual has the right and access and opportunity for full participation and integration in their communities, which obviously includes employment. The next fundamental principle category that we're going to talk about, so we've said kind of what we are required to do, what the laws, the government says we must do. And there's obviously compliance metrics that go along with that, but also what is proven to actually work. So let's look at some research. Before I hand this off to Nicole, the first piece of research we're going to talk about is the predictors of post-school success. So this is a study done where they looked at the activity, skills, or experiences that are positively correlated with successful post-secondary outcomes. They're looking at all the areas of transition, employment, post-secondary education, and independent living. And it was identified that of the 23 predictors that are correlated with the successful post-school outcomes, 21 of those support employment, which is awesome. They do define those specific predictors into 3 areas of evidence to kind of show how strongly correlate or how much strong evidence sits behind those activities, skills, or experiences. And those categories are research-based, evidence-based, or promising evidence. And you'll see on this next slide here how it's broken down. Those promising evidence or those promising practices, there's a wide range, which meaning there's some studies, some stuff sitting behind it that shows, that indicates the correlation between post-school success and employment. There's some research-based practices there. And then the highest level of evidence is those evidence-based practices. As you see, CTE is the only one here that is in the strongest category, the strongest predictor of post-school success. And CTE, when we boil it down, and we'll talk about it later as well, is really work-based learning, right? It's doing real work in authentic work environments, integrated with other employees and non-disabled peers. And that's where we really see the most correlation with post-secondary employment, which is exciting to see that what we're doing and what PREET says we have to do and what IDEA says we should be doing and what Employment First says we should be doing is showing in the research that it's actually yielding those post-school success outcomes. All right, over to Nicole.
Yeah, so along the lines of research and those predictors of post-school success, we also wanted to look at some of the skills that employers value. And so there was a study conducted by Song Ju and colleagues that looked at the skills employers consider important for entry-level employees, both with disabilities and without disabilities. And the skills that were rated the highest in order of importance were personal integrity and honesty, following directions, showing respect for others, and being on time. They also ranked 5 other skill areas in order of importance, and those include basic skills such as active listening or reading for understanding, basic work skills, and those are things like being on time and asking for help. They ranked social skills, and that's things like using appropriate language, appropriate behavior, and then personal traits, which are things like being responsible, being able to adapt to change, and then higher order thinking skills, and that's your critical thinking or your problem solving. And on the next slide, you'll see more examples of these individual skills here. Okay, we also looked at another study by Pickens and Diamond, where they interviewed rehab providers to determine what skills and experiences might impact their perceptions of an individual's employability. And those skills included social skills, which was ranked as most important. And that's actually not very surprising considering that there is literature out there that suggests that 90% of job loss by individuals with disabilities is often due to poor social skills. So that wasn't very surprising. But other skills were communication, self-determination, self-management, those soft skills, and general work skills. They also identified some other critical skill areas, and those were customer service skills, independent living skills, and job seeking skills. And on the next slide, you'll see some examples of those other identified critical skill areas. So what does this all mean? So many of the skills you'll notice that we have talked about and that we found in the literature are actually mandated by WIOA as PREETs. And so both studies and what we know about WIOA draw attention to the need for students to really focus on job exploration and sampling, those work-based learning experiences, the workplace readiness training, and then really increasing their self-advocacy prior to seeking those employment services. And so now we're going to talk about the fundamental principle work skills. And so here, in order to help you think about all of the skills that should be taught in preparing students for employment, we put together these 4 major categories based on the research, the predictors of post-school success, and federal laws. And those 4 categories are self-determination, self-advocacy, and just thinking about the definition of self-determination, there's so many skills within self-determination. So it's our hope that when you're thinking about the term in general, it's going to help you identify some of those sub-skills that you should be teaching to your students. The next category is work-related independent living skills. And these are skills like travel training, proper grooming, all of the independent living skills needed to be employed. So that's thinking about packing your lunch for work, getting to and from work, and things like that. The other area or category is going to be social communication skills or soft skills. And this encompasses being able to communicate appropriately, demonstrating appropriate behavior, and all of those little tiny soft skills in between. And then the last category is basic work readiness skills. And this is going to include skills such as customer service, safety, time management, technology, problem solving, and things like that. So we tried to package this in a way that would give you, 4 big categories that you could really start to pinpoint specific sub-skills within each of those areas.
So now we're going to look at what scope and sequence is. Scope and sequence is defined as what you teach and when you teach it. So it's like the organization of what you are teaching in whatever timeline that works for your program. The students are learning things in the correct order, and they are cumulatively taught skills, which means they're cumulatively taught or taught in from easiest to more complex, and building on knowledge as they go. So when we look at scope, we talk about the topics and concepts or skills that are being taught throughout the course, and the sequence is going to go through the order in which they will be taught. When you think of a scope and sequence, it is a course or program map that does identify concepts and skills students will learn and when. So how are they used? How are scope and sequences used? Well, it organizes and orders the skills you want to teach. So it's kind of a timeline for what you are teaching. It helps guide instruction for teachers, which also allows them to see what they are teaching, when they are teaching it, and it gives them time to plan for instruction. When teachers can plan ahead of time, it also allows them to tailor their instruction to the needs of their students and also be able to implement different research-based teaching practices. So what does the literature say about scope and sequence? The literature talks about starting with the end in mind. So just as we talk about the success criteria in our classroom, we also want to organize our scope and sequence by keeping the end in mind. So what do we want the students to accomplish by the end of their transition age years, and then work backwards? We also want to intentionally scaffold learning to build from less to more complex, so that students can develop the ability to execute the skills in more difficult contexts and to perform it more fluently to mastery. We also are introducing all relevant skills gradually and frequently throughout the scope and sequence so that students have time for practice and reinforcement so they can continue to progress through mastery. So the longitudinal approach, what is the long-term approach to scope and sequence? Learners are going to be able to improve their knowledge over time. So they are going to be able to build upon each skill that they're learning. Will hopefully maintain mastery of that skill with that reinforcement and that practice. And then that'll also help prevent a skills gap because as we know, constant practice and reinforcement helps prevent students from, making progress and unfortunately losing those skills that they've been taught over the years. So we're building on those skills and constantly practicing and reinforcing them over time. This also allows teachers to communicate across different age spans. So middle school teachers know what high school teachers are teaching, and high school teachers know what transition teachers are teaching. So everybody is able to see that on a bigger scale. And then it also provides that continuity between objectives from year to year. So it allows collaboration across grade levels and then also consistency with a smooth transition from one age level to the next. So from middle school to high school and from high school to transition. So now we're going to move into work-based learning experiences. So we'll start with talking about what are work-based learning experiences. And as most of you know, they are a set of instructional activities that involves collaborating with employers and schools to provide that hands-on learning experience in the workplace or on the job. It builds student awareness for potential careers, so it allows them to become aware of careers that are in their community or careers that maybe they never even thought about doing. It also encourages them to explore other career opportunities and kind of step out of their comfort zone. It helps initiate student preparation for careers, so students are able to prepare for specific career options or careers or jobs that they have maybe thought they couldn't do And so by doing work-based learning, it gives them the ability to gain that experience. These work-based learning may include some in-school jobs or after-school opportunities or off-campus opportunities. So some schools do some in-school work-based learning as well as off-campus work-based learning. This could also include some traditional, outside the traditional school setting options, such as internships. And we'll talk about those a little later. And then it'll also integrate the environment to the maximum extent possible. So we want to get students out in the community or out on a work-based learning site to the maximum extent possible. So why are work-based learning important? Well, most of these, I think you already know, but fostering self and career exploration. So again, students are able to assess their interests, strengths, and abilities while also getting the chance to see what kind of work they're interested in. It develops positive work habits and attitudes and soft skills. So they're learning how they should be acting on the job, communication, and just understanding what it's like to be an employee. It's also, teachers are able to assess their abilities and strengths on the job because, as you all know, working on the job and being in the classroom you're going to probably see two different students. It also increases the likelihood of employment and getting students out into the community. It expands their professional network, so this builds upon their resume. We know we could put work-based learning on students' resumes, so this helps them add to that professional network. We also learn about what are students' natural supports on the job. What are they going to naturally gain from being on a work site? And we can figure that out by observation on work-based learning sites. It also helps schools or transition programs improve their post-school outcomes within the STEP contract or having students gain successful employment. And it also teaches 21st century workplace readiness skills and prepares students for what they will experience once they exit school. So what are the benefits of work-based learning to students? So when students are on jobs, they are gaining that self-esteem. So they are understanding, hey, I can do this work and be successful at it. Because as we know, a lot of students are anxious to start work. So being able to have this experience before they actually get to start getting paid for their job or having to be on their own is helpful. It also helps them understand workplace culture and expectations. So they're building that connection between learning and earning, and understanding, again, what it's like to be in a workplace and to be around other employees, and just to understand how they need to act and how they need to communicate. It also helps them gain exposure to new experiences. A lot of students don't get a chance to see what's out there all the time, and this is just a chance for them to see a new job or a new experience, and learn about things that they can possibly do that they may not thought they ever could. And it helps, again, build their work portfolio and resume. So these jobs can go on their resume and show and when it's time for them to gain paid employment, it allows employers to see the experiences that they have.
Okay, so before we talk about specific work-based learning experiences that we should be providing to students, we need to understand how careers develop. And so career development is actually on a continuum, and it begins with this awareness where once you have awareness of work, you can begin to explore about different types of careers that connect with interest. And after you've explored various careers and connected them to interest, it's time to move into this preparation stage where you're going to learn how to do work through actually working. And finally, the last stage is training. And during this phase, you're going to learn about work in specific careers of interest. And then the focus is on developing your skills for that specific job. And so let's look at each one of these a little bit individually. So the first stage, or first one on the continuum, is this career awareness. And what this does is this is the stage where it starts in elementary and it can go through middle school. And some students may stay in this stage for a little while extra, maybe early high school. And during this time is when students become aware of the world of work, how they fit into the work-oriented society. And, think about a child. They know that their mom and dad go to work every day, but they don't really know what their parents do at work or what it means to work. So at this stage, we're really just introducing what work is and what it means to work. And some example experiences for this stage of career development is going to be things like workplace tours, guest speakers, career fairs, any kind of activity that's going to really expose students to different types of jobs. And then the next stage is this exploration stage. And this is where, in the previous stage, we talked about a child knowing that mom and dad go to work, maybe mom's a doctor, but they really don't know what a doctor's job includes. They don't really know that there's different types of work. Doctors out there. So there's a basic perception, but they don't know a lot about specific jobs. So during the exploration phase, students are going to start to explore different types of careers to help them decide what their interests are, what their abilities are, and also taking into consideration the type of lifestyle they wish to have after high school. So this happens in the beginning of middle school and early high school, and students should be in the career exploration phase or moving towards it at this time. And some example experiences that would fit nicely under career exploration might include interviews, job shadowing or mentorship. So anything that's going to give students some exposure to the workplace or talking to people who actually work in those areas that they're interested in. And so once students have explored various careers and their interests have kind of started to narrow down, they move into this career preparation phase. And this is where students are going to get a better idea of what their interests are, what their abilities are, and hopefully are ready to make some decisions about what they want their careers to look like in the future. And during this phase, students take what they have learned, so what they learn in the classroom, and start to apply that within these work settings. And this should begin around early to middle high school. And some experiences that can be offered during this time include things like a student-run enterprise, service learning activities, maybe some volunteering opportunities. So any experience that's really going to give the student an opportunity to start practicing their skills. And finally, once students have had, plenty of opportunities to practice in the preparation phase, it's time to move them into that training phase. And this is where students are going to have already started to narrow down their interests. They've identified what they're good at, what their skills are, and they're ready to train for a specific job. So in this phase, students are going to develop the technical knowledge or those technical skills needed for those entry-level jobs, or, and more importantly, in a specified job that they're interested in. And also during this time, students are going to decide whether or not, hey, do I need to go to college? Do I need to get some kind of further education or training in order to do what I'm interested in? And this usually begins late in a high school or extended age years. So starting maybe around 17 to that 22 age range. And some experiences that are often provided during this phase include things like internships, and those can be paid or unpaid, doesn't really matter. The apprenticeships, and any kind of general work experience. And so, before we go into specific workplace learning experiences, it's important to really talk about the importance of terminology. So, when you think about all of the experiences you provide during your community-based instruction, there could be some things that you're already doing that could also be considered a work-based learning experience and or might fit into that continuum of career development. So let me give you an example. Melanie and I were working with the district to develop a scope and sequence, just like you're going to do. And we sat down with the middle school and high school teachers, and we were all sitting in a room together. And we asked the middle school teachers, tell us about the work-based learning experiences you're currently providing. And they all kind of looked at each other and they didn't think they were providing any. And so, just kind of thinking, well, do you ever go out into the community? Oh, yeah, we go out into the community. We go to a nursing home once a month and help residents create like greeting cards for their families. And Melanie and I kind of looked at each other for a minute and thought, oh, okay, well, this sounds a lot like volunteering, maybe some service learning. So, and then thinking about that, so the high school had no idea that they were offering this experience. And so it's very important that whatever terms you decide to call things, that you all have a shared definition across your program, across your district and grade levels. So that way everyone's on the same page because you don't want to have gaps in the experiences you're providing, and you also don't want to have too much overlap. So just make sure that you guys are using the same terminology across all of your programs and people. The first work-based learning experience we're going to talk about is service learning. And service learning is any activity that's going to integrate meaningful community service. And whether or not that includes classroom instruction or not doesn't really matter. The difference with service learning, though, is that there is a reflection piece that's used after the experience in order to help students think about the experience they just had, think about things like civic responsibility and how the work that they did helped strengthen the community. So the difference here is that it's some kind of activity that is meaningful to the community in some type of community service, but it has that reflection piece with it. The next experience we're going to talk about is volunteering. And so volunteering is just when a person donates their time to an organization or cause and there is no money earned. It can be a one-time thing. It can be something that you do on a regular basis. And it's anything that directly or indirectly benefits people or a cause. It's important to note that most volunteer sites are going to be nonprofit organizations. So those are businesses that don't, make profit off of things. So if you're working with a site that is a nonprofit, that's probably going to be considered more of a volunteering situation. The next one is a student-led enterprise, and this is a school-based business that is anything that's going to produce goods or services for sale to be used by anyone besides the students who are participating in the business. And so these are things like your, coffee carts, your donut sales, things like that. The next one is these on-campus experiences. And these are experiences that are within the school setting and they're closely supervised. It's often the student's first work-based learning experience. And we use on-campus experiences to help us really figure out what students' vocational strengths are, to help them develop necessary skills in preparation for eventually going out into those employment settings within their communities. Next, we have these workplace tours, and these are group excursions. So you take the whole class or a group and you go there for the purpose of observing specific work sites. And during this experience, students are going to learn about the business, they're going to meet employees, they're going to have opportunities to ask questions and actually see work happening in progress. Next, we have job shadowing. And job shadowing is a non-paid experience where students are going to spend time with an individual who's already working in a career of interest. And during this experience, students are going to learn the realities of the job by following that worker around throughout their day. And this is going to give students an opportunity to see what essential job functions are involved in this particular career. It allows them to ask questions to someone who's actually doing that work and allows them to watch in order to evaluate whether this is something that they're really interested in and do they have the skills and the aptitude for this particular job. And next here we have internships. And this is going to be a temporary position that is going to focus more of like that on the job training. This is going to allow students to develop specific skills related to the job before qualifying for an actual job. So during this time, the stakes aren't as high. It gives students an opportunity to practice and to really, have an opportunity to work in that setting. It can be paid or unpaid. And if it's unpaid, it would be considered more of a exploratory kind of thing. And something to keep in mind for internships is that you need to make sure that you're aware of and looking into making sure that you're aligning with the Fair Labor Standards Act, and to make sure that you're understanding some specific guidelines for things such as the duration of time that students are in these internships, and the age of the student and the number of hours that are being worked in this internship. So it's just important for you to keep that in the back of your mind if you're providing internships. So work-based learning experience research. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the research tells us about these work-based learning experiences. So there was a study done by Pickens and Diamond that looked at the types of vocational experiences VR providers believed had a positive impact on students with extensive support needs and their ability to obtain employment services. So based on the findings from the study, there were 5 experiences that were found to have a positive impact. And these were situational assessments and job tryouts, non-paid work experiences, community-based jobs, volunteer experiences, and then home-based experiences. And we'll talk about each one of these individually. So the first one is situational assessments and job tryouts. So these are a way to observe the student working in order to get a baseline to see if improvements can be made. So these observations are important because it's going to allow the student to demonstrate their preferences and their skills and abilities. And it's also going to give you an opportunity to document the work experience and provide information about the student's interest and their potential skills and aptitudes. So this gives you an opportunity to really see, can the student do the work? What skills are they missing? What skills do I need to teach them? So this is a really great way to help the student figure out whether or not that's a good job for them. The next one is non-paid vocational experiences. And these vocational experiences need to be they could be in a natural environment or in a simulated environment. Simulated jobs commonly found in school environments are things like working in the cafeteria, maybe some type of cleaning, janitorial stuff, or maybe assisting a teacher or a nurse at the school. But something important to note here is that when you think about providing simulated experiences, what this study told us was that service providers indicated that if the student did not do well in a simulated environment, it definitely increased their doubts that they would be able to do it in the real environment. So if you're going to use simulated environments, that's something to keep in mind. Something else to keep in mind is that, generalization is a really hard thing to teach students. So it's always optimal if we begin teaching them in the natural environment. So I realize sometimes that's not always a possibility, but if it is, that would definitely be the better situation. The next one is community-based jobs. So, what this study told us was that community-based jobs are any experience provided within the community. And it's important to note that the authors found that the VR service providers were more likely to provide services to students who had participated in the following programs you see on here. So, summer work programs, Project Search, Guideposts for Success, and the STEP program. So all of these are specific programs. So if your program is providing these similar experiences, but maybe you're not calling them these things, that shouldn't really be too much of an issue. But as long as your programs are offering similar experiences as in these programs that are listed here, it shouldn't be too different. Then we have volunteer experiences. So Pickens and Diamond also found that service providers really value volunteer work because it really allows students to hone their skills and figure out what their preferences are. However, an experience is only really considered valuable if it is a natural work experience and natural expectations. And it also needs to allow for observation and documentation of the student's performance. And really, you kind of want to be documenting their performance in any of these experiences so you have an idea of the skills that they need to maybe brush up on, skills they don't have, they need to have, you know, data. We can always do lots of things with data. The next one is this home-based experience. So this one was pretty interesting because home-based experiences was found to be underused as a job experience by Voc Rehab. The results from this study found that this type of experience may have a positive impact on whether or not a service provider views a student as being employable. Chores are seen as a way to provide students with vocational experiences such as cooking, cleaning, and maintenance. And in addition to job-related skills such as self-determination and initiation. So when you're sending home those parent questionnaires for your IEPs, make sure you asked about what kind of chores and things that students are doing in their home, because that seems to be something that VR does in fact value.
So now we're going to talk about timelines and sequence of work-based learning. So we need to make sure that when we are planning the work-based learning as a scope and sequence, we should be teaching the students focusing on teaching the students necessary skills for functioning in the adult world. So that's where our focus should be. When organizing work-based learning experiences, we should be looking at what the students are doing, why are they doing it, when are they going to do it, where are they going to do it, and how are the teachers going to assess, plan, and teach for these work-based learning experiences. Once your scope and sequence is completed, it should help simplify identifying targeted skills and how teachers should be integrating them into the curriculum for greater success. So what does the literature say about work-based learning scope and sequence? So the literature has a lot of info on work-based learning experiences. So I'm going to touch on the most important pieces of it. First, we want to make sure that we are starting as early as 7th grade, introducing community-based work experiences. Moving into high school, we want students 15 to 18 years old to have at least 4 different community-based work experiences in addition to other school jobs that they may have. So we really want to get those students out into the community. The literature says that job specialization begins at 19. Based on the previous work experiences the student has done, or just their preferences and the job sampling they've completed. The instruction should focus on enhancing the productivity and endurance of students and also refining work and work-related skills. And then 80% or more of their day should focus on supported work training and general refinement of community skills for high school and transition age students. So it's important that we're really focusing on getting the students the training and the experiences they need to be successful once they leave or exit school. So the right side is an example of what a possible scope and sequence for work-based learning could look like. So we start in middle school with that career exploration and job shadowing, and that can extend all the way into high school. And then we look at work sampling, which could start as early as sophomore or junior year, or even earlier than that. And that will flow into transition, along with service learning, internships, apprenticeships, as well as paid employment. So all of those areas can focus or can go into the transition age for students. So this is just an example of what a work-based learning scope and sequence could look like.
So before we talk about what your next steps are in developing your own scope and sequence for your school or your program or your district, let's address a few of the common pitfalls that we often see schools encountering. One of the first things we want to call out is there's some wonderful curriculum out there that comes with a scope and sequence already written out. And I don't know about you, but there's been no time in my career where I've been able to use something straight out of the box and have it address the needs and instruction styles that my students need. So really make sure that you're being analytical with the tools that are being presented to you and made available to you. There's some wonderful things within those, but also we want to make sure that just because that's what the person that wrote the curriculum thinks the sequence in which things should be taught doesn't mean that that is going to be what works for your students. Also, sometimes the templates themselves can put confinement on how we structure things or how we set things up. So just recognizing that just because there are pre-written scope and sequence or there is a specific template, that it isn't a one size fits all. And you really want to figure out what's going to work for you, what's going to address the needs of your students, and what's going to help set our students up for that post-secondary success. So ensuring that you're thinking about what's made available and that it really is going to address the needs of your students before just moving forward with something that's provided. We also want to be weary of programming all students the same way. And I recognize that sometimes we just have to roll with it because that's what's available in our schools or in our districts. But recognizing that there are ways that we can individualize or need to individualize the way students are programmed into courses or the specific experiences or opportunities that are presented and offered to our students. When we think about transition age youth, sometimes we only get students in our program for the 18 to 22. So sometimes we're taking what should have been a 7-year scope and sequence and shrinking it down to get that in just those 18 to 22 years that you might have them, for example, in a transition program. Sometimes we get the wonderful benefit of having our students all the way from 9th to 22, and that's a different spread of the scope and sequence. We can think a little bit differently about the progression for over 7 years versus 4 years. But all of this is centered around individual student needs, specifically utilizing their vocational assessments and evaluations and inventories. Some of the things we discussed today, those situational assessments, those are going to help guide and fuel how we present our students with particular experiences and how we sequence those things to build skill and help refine interest as far as careers are considered. We also want to make sure that sometimes, like I mentioned before, that we need to think about, we are receiving our students in a lot of circumstances from what we're referring to as feeder schools. This could be your middle school sending students to the high school. You could be a co-op that has a lot of different schools that your students are coming from. There could be an in-district feeder high school that sends students to a transition program, or a few high schools that send students to a transition program. But it's really important to share with them what sort of experiences and opportunities are going to be provided in your school, as well as, or your program, as well as what we would want them to come equipped with. So pulling back the curtains and allowing a opportunity for communication and collaboration when it comes to our transition services and our career and employment preparation that we're providing. So we aren't stuck with a student that's 18 that has never had a conversation about their career. Maybe we can think about how we're intentionally working with the schools that students are coming from. And sometimes even within our own building, making sure that the teachers of 11th grade are talking to the students of 12th grade and vice versa. That vertical planning is also going to be important, even internally as well. And then finally, one of the common pitfalls that we touched on earlier a little bit, but really making sure that we are in alignment with the laws, regulations, and policies that are in place. Each district, school, what have you, is going to have kind of individualized policies or rules around taking students out in the community and, transportation and those kinds of things. There are certain things that ISB has delineated that are specific to work-based learning. And then there's some federal laws like the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, that has very specific regulations around internships and work-based learning as well. So we want to make sure that we all have all of our ducks in a row when we're setting up a scope and sequence, and that we're thinking about getting our students outside of our building and into meaningful work experiences throughout their entire educational career. We want to ensure that we are in alignment so we don't get ourselves or anyone else in trouble, and that the safety and liability is all covered in regards to those experiences. So those are some common things. We could talk all day about other things that you might need to watch out for, but these are some of the big ones we want to make sure are being acknowledged as you move forward and think about your own scope and sequence. So what now? We've given you a lot of information, and we've gone through a lot of research and laws and concepts that will really help shape how you build out a scope and sequence for yourself. So whether you're starting from scratch, whether you're refining something you have, whether you're taking something that isn't working and trying to make it work, or just trying to be a little bit more intentional and thoughtful about what's being offered at your school or in your program, here are some steps that you can take using the information that we discussed today. So way back towards the beginning, we talked about these 4 work skill categories that we kind of came up with using the laws and the research, those 4 overarching categories. If you didn't write them down, that's okay, because this entire slideshow deck is uploaded as a PDF where you found this webinar on the ICTW website. So please go back and reference that. But you want to start with those 4 categories and just brainstorm. Think about all the skills that should be taught in each of those 4 overarching categories. Think about really how we drill down to specific skills and things that you really want your students walking away with, and are going to really help them be set up for success after graduation. After you've kind of brainstormed those skills, and you're going to sequence them, starting again at our foundational, where do we start, and moving them all the way towards that advanced, some backwards planning. Where do we want them to be? What is everything that needs to occur to help get them there? And that's the start of the work skills scope and sequence. From there, you will then identify the work-based learning experiences that are going to support or reinforce all of those things. So we've got all these wonderful skills. We have them beautifully sequenced. We're really excited about them. So now you think about, how are we going to work into those work-based learning experiences? How do we ensure that our students are getting a wide range of opportunities to build skills in different environments with different opportunities? And recognize that some things are going to address multiple things at once, which is awesome. Think smarter, not harder, right? So how can we make sure that we're being intentional and that work-based learning experiences are supporting the skills that we want to teach when we want to teach them, and they're also being reinforced over time? And then that final step is to design an action plan. So you're going to come up with this beautiful scope and sequence. You're going to have all these exciting things. You're going to think really hard about what sort of work-based learning is going to support those skills. And then we got to figure out how we're going to put it into action, right? How are we going to either build from what we have to where we want to be? How are we going to polish up the scope and sequence we already have? And that's through action planning and being really thoughtful and setting goals for the program's growth over time. Here's an example of how one way that you could think about that action plan once you've gotten a chance to kind of play around with a scope and sequence for your program. We want to start with our current state. Where are we at right now? Completely honest and open. Where are we right now? And calling out some of the things that we maybe need to change about our program. Then we put on our time traveler's hat and go to our desired future state. Where do we want to be in the future? What's on that vision board for this program? And then the action plan. And that's kind of the meat and potatoes that goes between your current state and your desired future state. What sort of actionable items can be taken? What sort of little baby steps can we set into play to move us towards that desired future state? So here are a couple of examples just to illustrate that. So example number 1, the skills taught in the vocational courses are not currently taught in a logical sequence or progression. Teachers are not collaborating with each other to align their course content. Common thing. The desired future state is that skills are taught in vocational courses and are taught in a logical sequence. Teachers work together to plan course content to ensure skill progression over multiple years, courses, and associated work-based learning experiences. How are we going to get there? Well, we're going to work together to identify skills needed for employment and the logical sequence for when skills should be taught. And that's going to be in collaboration with all teachers that are doing vocational or transition instruction to ensure that we're on the same page about these things. That's going to be our starting point for that action plan. And another example is our current state is students come from a few feeder schools and arrive with a wide range of previous work-related instruction and skills. Also another common thing that we've already mentioned. In our desired future state, our feeder schools will provide work-related instruction in alignment with our program, which allows for us to provide more time in community-based work-based learning experiences. So students come with some of those kind of precursor skills and opportunities. And how we're going to get there? Well, we are going to share and discuss our program scope and sequence with our feeder schools, outlining preferred work-related instruction and skills to be addressed before they come to our transition program, which will better set them up for our future employment. So that's just an example. This is one template. You'll see a lot of continuous improvement kind of action planning templates out there. Find what works for you. This is a nice simple one that might help you get started in thinking about how you can improve and build on the scope and sequence for your program.
Now we'll move on to some helpful resources. So here we have links to related ICTW resources. These coincide with the information that we discussed in our presentation. As Jessica said, there will be a PDF of the slides, so you can access these links through the PDF of the slides. And then here are some additional links to websites that provide you with more information about the information we discussed in our presentation. Note that there are some links to Illinois laws or procedures, policies to college and career readiness and career expectations, along with Department of Labor for the Fair Labor Standards Act, and then NTACT work-based learning resources. If you haven't set up a free account, I highly suggest doing so that you can access those work-based learning resources.